So, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Vari. I am the Sierra Youth Rep, and I'll be hosting today's panel on Build It Now, a jobs-led green future for young people. So, before I start, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors, the Offshore Wind Industry Council, and to encourage you to join CERA if you're not already a member. We're Labour's environment campaign, and we'd love to have you join us. Details of how to do so are on our website. So I'm going to start off by introducing the topic for today, and then our speakers, and then I'll pass it over to them. So young people today face an economic crisis on a scale not seen for many years, and they also risk living through the consequences of catastrophic climate change. Building our green economy could offer hope, but ensuring our green economy will deliver for young people is not always straightforward. In 2019, the Scottish TUC released a report showing that installations of renewable energy had increased, the number of directly employed workers had been reducing. At the same time, various sources have highlighted a significant skills gap in the low carbon sector, with particular lack of STEM graduates posing problems for the growth of these industries. So the questions we will be addressing today is: how do we build a green economy that offers good jobs in the right locations for our young people? And how do we equip our young people to take advantage of all the opportunities growing the green economy can offer? So to help me tackle these difficult questions, I'm joined by a fantastic panel, including the Right Honourable Liam Byrne. So Liam undertook some of the toughest jobs in the last Labour government, including coordinating responses to the last financial crisis. He is MP Birmingham Hodge Hill and Shadow Mayor for the West Midlands. I'm then joined by Nadia Whittam. So Nadia was elected in 2019 as the Member of Parliament for Nottingham East, and at 24 is Parliament's youngest MP. She campaigns on migrants' justice, workers' rights, child poverty, and of course climate justice. Melanie On, so you'll all know Melanie as former MP for Great Grimsby. She was recently appointed Deputy Chief Executive at Renewable UK with a particular focus on offshore wind. And last but not least, we're joined by Paul Nowak, who is Deputy General Secretary at the TUC. Paul has been a great friend of Sierra, and it's brilliant to have him join us this morning. Before I hand over to Liam, make sure you're joining the conversation via Twitter using the hashtag Sierra Green Jobs and hashtag Labour Connected. And you can also ask questions as we go along using the Q&A function. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Liam.
Mary, thank you so much. And thanks to Sierra for organising this, and to Mel for helping make it happen. I've relied on Sierra so much over the last couple of years now, as we've been pulling together citizens' assemblies in Birmingham and the West Midlands to try and map our own route map to a just transition. We found the expertise and the organisational strength of Sierra absolutely invaluable. So anybody watching, I'd really encourage you to join and to get involved. So I'm just going to say three things very quickly about the sea we're sailing on, about some of the big policy responses that we're going to need to advocate for, and then just a final word about the politics of this. As we go into the elections, it's something we're having to think about a lot, because we hope to run on and win on one of the first Green Labour manifestos here in the West Midlands, the biggest mayoralty outside London, in about 276 days' time. So first, what are we going to face? I mean, we're going to face, folks, pretty much the biggest recession that any of us will have been through. Globally, it will be the biggest recession since about 1870. The Bank of England forecasts, if they come to pass, entail unemployment in regions like mine doubling back up to the level that we last saw in 1987. And we know, because of the communities that we serve and the communities that we come from, that will trigger the most unholy of vicious cycles. And just to kind of add incompetence to insult and insult to injury, the government seems to think that it is wise that not only should we be dicing with death when it comes to their response to the pandemic, we should also be playing Russian roulette with the European Union at the same time. And so the nightmare scenario for us in 2021 is that we have no deal and no vaccine. Right now, after all the sacrifice that people have made, we deserved a plan that was clear. And what we've got is a plan that is hazy and a prime minister that is lazy. And that is going to really hurt working communities next year. So we have got to be the party that is advocating for some big and bold measures to seize this moment of opportunity when what is needed is a good old-fashioned Keynesian demand-side stimulus. We need to be using those measures to dramatically accelerate the path to zero carbon. Right now, we have a government that is so useless that they cannot tell us anything about the future pathway of the carbon price beyond 2021. They can't tell us about our future relationship with the European emission trading system. Big climate decisions are basically being left. And my fear is that they'll be left too late. So to get unemployment down in a region like mine in the West Midlands, just the sheer fiscal maths of dealing with unemployment that doubles, we need a capital kickstart of about £3.5 billion next year alone. And the reality is that we could have that money if the government was serious about levelling up. So if we distributed the capital budget already in the forecasts, according to population, that money would be available for the West Midlands next year. And just to give you a kind of an illustration of the kind of outcomes that you could achieve with that, £3.5 billion buys you about 11,000 new homes. You could retrofit about 111,000 homes, and you could install solar on 215,000 homes, and you could create 92,000 jobs in the process. So, the capital kickstart that we should be arguing for next year could dramatically accelerate our path to net zero carbon. Now, the politics of this, I think, are quite interesting. So we're doing a lot of research at the moment into how voters feel about this. People feel on the horns of a dilemma, basically. So when we talk to voters in the West Midlands, they basically worry, do we need to recover first and then go green? And they don't feel very comfortable about that because they feel they're kicking the can down the road. The dilemma dissolves when you put the lens of green manufacturing in front of people. And so our big argument here in the West Midlands will be that we want to become the capital of green manufacturing, because actually we think we can be the place that makes the technologies that the world needs to cut carbon emissions, and we can do that in a way that creates jobs. So I think in terms of policy and politics, we really need kind of CERA to be a place where we can be sharing ideas in the run up to the elections next year. Final word very quickly is on the approach that we take to this, because the reality is that the hero model of leadership, as I've called it, where you have politicians standing on pedestals, having selfies taken, or cutting ribbons on big shiny buildings, that is not going to get us to where we need to get to. Actually, we need to take an approach that is rooted in the philosophy of community well-building, where we perform our political role in communities, bringing people together to create hyper-local strategies for decarbonisation. And I keep this book on my desk. It's he had the greatest haircut in Labour history, as we know, but Clement Attlee's book in 1920, The Social Worker, was a brilliant evocation of this style of politics. Ultimately, if you're a socialist, you believe in society, you believe in building society. And right now we need to be rebuilding society and community connections around the shared mission that we all have. And if we can do that in a way that puts young people at the forefront of designing those solutions, then actually we'll be doing a good job in passing the baton to the new generation of leadership that our country needs. I'll stop there. Hopefully that's enough to get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Liam. And so pass on to you, Nadia.
Thanks so much, Ori, and thank you, Liam. It's a real pleasure to follow on from you, and particularly to hear about all the work that you're doing in the West Midlands. As Liam has already touched on, we're set for a recession that will dwarf 2008 and a jobs massacre like nothing we've ever seen in our lifetimes, or possibly our parents' or grandparents' lifetimes either. Yet, when the government talks about building back, you notice that young people, women, and other marginalised people are jarringly excluded from the Prime Minister's vision of building back Britain. I've been asked to speak about young people this morning, and I will, but I also want to speak about women's role in building back and decarbonising. So we often hear about green industry as being about hard hats and construction, and that's very important. But Annalise was absolutely right to highlight yesterday that green jobs aren't just those jobs. They're not just jobs that are traditionally thought of as men's work. It's also about decarbonising the social care sector, for example, which is 8 times less carbon intensive than the average of other industries. It would create 2 million jobs, predominantly jobs that are done by women and currently by low paid, disproportionately migrant women, disproportionately women of colour. And it would close the gender equality, the gender employment gap at the same time. But what we're seeing at the moment is the Committee on Climate Change reported that our government is not on track to meet the 4th or 5th targets. It has met the first and the second and is on track to meet the third. But that's extremely worrying when we know that scientists are saying that what we do in the next 10 years, in the next decade, is going to determine the kind of planet that we have left to live on in the next 30 years. The government's target of 2050 is not only far too far away, but we're also not on track to meet that until 2098 anyway. So focusing on young people, we've seen in the past few years how young people have re-energised the climate movement. We've seen the rise of Greta Thunberg and youth climate strikers, and I've been really privileged to work with those youth climate strikers in Parliament on a bill called Teach the Future, which is basically about decarbonising the education sector, about retrofitting buildings, but also about making climate education mandatory. And this has massive public support, but it's not something that the government is currently listening to. About 71% of adults, this is according to a YouGov poll, think that climate change should be taught in schools. So really you'd think that this would be a vote winner for the government, but they're not listening. We've seen sort of ad hoc schemes by the government paying lip service to opportunities for young people. But what we really need is a just transition that creates opportunities for young people to be part of that, like apprenticeships, but apprenticeships that go on to become apprenticeships that are well paid and have good conditions and go on to become jobs that are well paid, properly valued and have good conditions. A little bit about the youth movement and some prominent movements that have taken place within the Labour Party. There is, of course, the youth climate strikes, and they've been led predominantly by teenagers, people who were too young to even vote, but have forced the government to put this on its agenda. But also Labour for a Green New Deal, which has been led by mainly under 30s and under 25s, and they did a lot of work to get the Green New Deal policy platform taken more seriously, not just thinking about rebuilding society and getting back to normal, but talking about transforming society so that after coronavirus, we're not going back to a broken economic model that is polluting and exploitative of people and the planet, but is transforming things to how they should be. I'm going to leave it there because I want to leave enough time for questions, and I've got to leave a bit early, and I'm really keen to have a discussion with everyone.
Thanks, Nadia. It's great to follow you this morning, and thanks for inviting me along today. My name is Melanie On. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive at Renewable UK, and for me, I think that I'd like to see government making sure that when it talks about a green economic recovery, that it's not an add-on, that it's not something separate to economic recovery, that the building blocks to ensuring mitigation against some of the damage that we're going to see coming out of the coronavirus pandemic are put in place now, so that we don't see huge amounts of fallout, or at least have taken significant enough action to prevent against the very worst of it. And I think that the renewable sector has got a really important role to play in that. There's loads of different things that I could talk about. I think one of the most controversial statements that has been made in our sector is that, you know, government should be looking at electrifying the hell out of everything. And that's because without the confirmation of knowing that there is going to be a need for those for the electricity that renewables can provide, then the manufacturers, the developers, they're just not going to invest unless we can make sure that we've got that pipeline coming down the road. I was really interested in Mari's introduction when she said that making sure that we've got jobs in the right locations for our young people. And I wonder what that really means, because I'm sat in Grimsby today. We've had fantastic success with the renewable sector. We've got a blade factory across the river in Hull that directly employs over 1,000 people. It's contributed to significant change in the local economy in the Hull area. And we have got 2 operations and maintenance bases, which is a focus really of where we think we can add most value from the renewable sector. So those are the areas where we can get those high paid jobs, that they are long term, looking for the next 30, 35 years, and have that additional added value, as well as having that intellectual value as well, the things that we can export to other countries where we see this emerging. So for me, yes, I think this is great. You know, these are jobs for young people. They're going to be 30, 35 years. It's only growing. We're developing this notion of specialisation in our area. But where are the young people? We do have young people here, obviously, but very often we're seeing them move over to the cities. So we're going to have to make sure that that we are providing something that is suitably attractive to young people to participate in. And I think that, you know, we're seeing more and more of our companies in the renewable sector opening up opportunities through training, through mentoring, through apprenticeships, who are engaging in communities at the very earliest of stages. I know while I was the MP here, I did a lot of work with the companies here, took them into schools. They were sponsoring schools teachers as part of the Teach First programme. So really engage in educating young people about the opportunities that are available. And if I can just put a quick plug in for Renewable UK, at the end of October, we're going to be holding a Global Offshore Wind Conference, and we're going to be having a Futures Forum part of that. So for all young people from the age of 15 to 24, we're going to be providing access to companies, to those senior people in the industry, so that they can really give a helping hand to young people who are interested in getting into the sector. And I think we do need to see strong emphasis on growing the sector. One of the big challenges is around the supply chain. That's where really the focus over the last 5 to 10 years has been about cost reduction and making sure that we can deliver electricity at a low cost so it doesn't get passed on to the consumer. Now we've achieved that at £39 per megawatt hour, which is phenomenal. It's now about the next phase. So how can we develop those supply chains and make them really strong? We know that in Yorkshire, for example, there's 170 companies alone that are involved in the renewable sector, and making sure that we've got policies that provide for that growth, that aren't all about cost, and providing electricity at the lowest cost at the exclusion of everything else, will mean that there is much more flexibility for developers to be able to provide those jobs in areas like Grimsby, like Birmingham, like Nottingham, and beyond, that service our young people now and long into the future.
Okay, well, thanks, Melanie, and thanks to our chair, Vari, as well, and indeed thanks to Sarah for organising what is, I think, sort of a really vital debate from the TUC's perspective, how you put young people at the heart of our efforts to build a low carbon economy, and a low carbon economy that hopefully is underpinned by good quality jobs as well. I've got 5 minutes, so I've got 5 things to say. I'll try and get them out in the 5 minutes. The first one, we've already covered it in the discussion. We're having this discussion at a time when the prospect of mass unemployment is very real, and it will be mass unemployment that has a disproportionate effect on young people, whether it's the next wave of school leavers and college leavers or university graduates, whether it's young people who can't complete apprenticeships, or indeed, we know just during the period of the lockdown, young people were 2.5 times more likely to work in sectors that were shut down in hospitality or in parts of non-food retail or so on. So I suppose my sort of observation on that is that mass unemployment is not inevitable. Government could do things now that would make a big difference. Not only the sort of son or daughter's scheme, successor to the job retention scheme, but also thinking about a real jobs guarantee scheme for young people, something much more ambitious than the government's Kickstart programme, something much more like the previous Labour government's Future Jobs Fund. A programme that offered real job opportunities to young people working in the green economy on secure contracts, being paid at least a living wage, with access to trade unions and real training opportunities. I think government could send a very clear message that it was serious about greening our economy and supporting young people if it had the ambition to match the scale of something like the Future Jobs Fund. Second thing, and I think linked to the jobs guarantee, we're not going to decarbonise our economy with the £3 billion that the Chancellor has put on the table. That's a useful down payment, but if you look at what's happening in Germany, for example, where they've committed €130 billion over the next 2 years to massively invest in infrastructure, that's the sort of scale of ambition we're going to need in the UK. And at the TUC, we've called for the government to put in £85 billion over the next 2 years to invest in our green infrastructure, whether that's low carbon energy, whether that's low carbon housing, electrifying our transport system, a huge range of projects that we think have got the capability to support 1.25 million new jobs over the course of the next 2 years. That's the sort of level ambition that we need. Liam talked about what that would mean in a region like the West Midlands, but we need to see this in every region and nation of the UK. A third point from me is that I think it's really important. We've talked a little bit so far in the conversation about just transition, and just transition is really important. But I think it's really important that the voice of workers, and young workers in particular, are heard in that debate around just transition. And just transition should be something that is done with workers, not to them, particularly our workers in the energy industry, in energy intensive industries, who will have concerns about what does this mean for their jobs, their families and communities. It's important that we engage people, that we give them real voice and agency in these processes at every level, whether that's the level of the workplace, and I'd like to see employers obligated to develop net zero plans with recognised unions, for example, but at a sectoral level and at a national level, we've called for the establishment of a Just Transition Commission to bring together employers, unions, governments and others to plan our way forward to a low carbon future. So that sense that we're actually bringing people with us rather than doing this to people, I think is really important. Last 2 points from me, Vari. I mean, none of this is going to happen without investment in skills, and investment in skills for those currently in the labour market and those about to enter the labour market. And we've called for people to have the right to lifelong learning right throughout their working lives, supported by individual learning accounts. I mentioned before a real jobs guarantee programme, but crucially also a social security system that allows people to take time out to retrain, to reskill, to get the skills or the qualifications they're going to need to move into new parts of the economy. We know it's like that people will have to change careers throughout their working lives, and it's important that we see that as part of the normal working life, and we support people to do that. Last point from me, and I think it's a really important one from a trade union perspective. We do really need to focus on the quality of employment, and I want to see lots of new green jobs, but the reality is that not every green job is a good job at the moment, and there's more that we can collectively do, employers, unions and government, to make sure that those green jobs are good jobs, are sustainable jobs, and are jobs that are rewarding in every sense of the word, not just in terms of people's pay packets, but also in terms of the work that people do. And I know, we've had concerns, for example, Melanie's here, obviously from Renewables UK, about making sure that sector is a sector that does support good quality employment across the piece. But if you think about construction, I mean, going to be crucial in terms of building new low carbon housing, retrofitting existing housing. This is a sector that is absolutely riven with bogus self-employment, with contracting out, with long supply chains. And I think if we're serious about, sort of turning those into good quality green jobs, then we need to be serious about reshaping the employment relations in a sector like construction as well. So I said, Vari, I'll try and keep it to 5 minutes. There's 5 ideas for 5 minutes, and hopefully that helps inform the discussion as well.
Brilliant, thanks Paul. Yeah, thank you all for your contributions. If anyone on the call wants to put some questions to our panellists, then please put them in the Q&A box, but I'm going to use my chair's privilege to kick off the questions, and I'm going to start with Nadia. I really liked that point that you made, that not all green jobs are hard hat jobs, but I was wondering what you think needs to happen in order to ensure that talented people from all backgrounds are able to take advantage of the green jobs that are currently out there.
I think that's a really good question, Vari. I think the first thing is that those jobs aren't equitably distributed across the country. They tend to be concentrated in cities and in the south, and even in places like Nottingham, which is a fairly big city. It doesn't feel like we have our fair share of green jobs, and that's because the government just hasn't invested in them. I think we have to sort of scrap things right back to basics and start with education, so that all young people have equal access to good quality comprehensive education, and then can go on to well-paid unionised green jobs. So take, for example, the social care sector. At the moment, that's just not an appealing job for people to go into because it's so low paid, it's undervalued, and there just aren't any training opportunities in it. Whereas if we put the amount of investment into social care that it deserves and into training opportunities within the profession that is commensurate with the skill of the profession, then I think we'd find that more people would become care workers. If we, invested in retrofitting care homes and in, as Liam was saying, decentralising models of work so that people have more power in workplaces, and decentralising decision making so that it's more localised.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess to pick up on that, Liam, you talked about the sort of levelling up across the UK. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about, so obviously as Shadow Metro Mayor, what more powers do you think Metro mayors should have in places like the West Midlands in order to actually deliver these ambitions? And I was wondering if you could also talk a little bit about the jobs guarantee that you've pledged as part of your bid for mayor. Oh, you're on mute, Liam.
The truth is there's not a lot more formal power that you need, but there is an awful lot more resources that you need. So if we had our fair share of Britain's capital budget, we would have an extra £7 billion to spend in the West Midlands over the next 5 years. And we could deploy that in a way that was connected to job guarantees for young people. So, the mayor here has compulsory purchase order powers. If you then, and already transport powers as well, if you then married that to the resources that we need, then it would be really much easier for the mayor to bring forward some of those big capital projects in a way that was connected to a jobs guarantee. The way that we see this happening, though, is on a much more local and cooperative way. So we have at the moment running a co-op task force, which the Co-op Party has organised for us. We're going to publish that first report at Co-op Party conference in a few weeks' time. But we're already starting to bring forward some incredibly imaginative ideas in the way in which we provide energy, make sure there is food security, make sure there is training opportunities, make sure there is worker ownership of, retrofitting co-ops or taxi organisations that are running electric vehicles, and so this approach that in the jargon is called community wealth building is a really important philosophy for us to marry to our ambitions for decarbonisation. And the invisible hand of the market is not going to deliver that. I mean, you need the visible hand of local politicians rooted in their communities trying to make shit happen. The big frustration that we have is that people can see their local urban environments just degrading and degrading and degrading, and that heightens the fear of the vicious circle that will be triggered as unemployment begins to rise. So if we kind of take community wealth building plus decarbonisation plus cooperative values, it gives us the chance to actually begin putting in place a very different kind of economic model to help us accelerate the path to net zero carbon.
And I guess going on from that as well, so we've got a question in the chat which is in reference to hyperlocalism, and as Nadia suggested, decoupling environmental policy from grand gestures. Does the panel have any general ideas of how local campaigns at council level could present environmental policy as a vote winner? Liam, do you want to respond to that first?
A good example is air quality. So. We find the two ways to cut through on the environment with voters is green manufacturing and air quality. And our basic message is, look, cleaner air means longer lives. It's kind of as simple as that. So some of the experiments that we're going to start running are about, this sounds a trivial example, but, putting air quality monitors in playgrounds so that parents can see the damage to their children's lungs that is caused by their decisions to drive kids to school. But you've got to marry that with effort to bring parents together to actually plan safe routes to school, to put in place safe cycling lanes, organise those gorgeous little school buses with all the little children walking in crocodiles along to the school gate. You've got to do that bit as well. So you can't just kind of put the whole onus on parents to just sort of change their behaviour. You've got to involve parents in coming together with behaviour change, and there'll be 1,000,001 kind of little examples of projects like that, which will be what we need.
Yeah, the school buses are really cute. So more of those. Nadia, do you have a response to that as well? General ideas for how campaigns at local level that councillors can implement?
Yeah, this is a really good question, Liam. Well, we're very fortunate in Nottingham that our Nottingham City Council has pledged to be the first city in the UK to be carbon neutral by 2028. It's very difficult for local councils at the moment because they're working with one hand tied behind their backs. They just don't have the funding that they really need to be able to launch the ambitious campaigns that the climate crisis demands. But I think that a really good place to start, and one of the things that our council is doing and I'll be involved in, is a climate assembly, because that brings together lots of environmental activists and people from all walks of life to discuss what the future of the city should be. And really, when we're talking about decentralising decision making and embracing sort of non-hierarchical forms of decision making and power, then I think that's the best way to start. I'd also look, I don't know whether you're a councillor, Liam, but I'd look at other groups in your local area to see what they're doing and whether there are any grassroots collectives that have initiatives that you can partner up with and give a voice to.
Good suggestions. Melanie, do you know of any good campaigns from your time as Member of Parliament that people can adopt?
Some of the most memorable things for me were community organised activities, and very often we saw it coming from primary school age children who got their whole schools involved, who got their neighbours involved, whether it was looking at plastic reduction whether it was about increasing recycling. There was one little girl, Isla. Do you even remember her name? Because she was so active in her local community. She was part of River Clean. She was part of litter picking, and she was amazing, really, at kind of encouraging the community to be a bit more aware of their immediate environment. And I think that that's one of the things, if you talk about environment generally, I think it misses the mark with people very often. They don't really see how it impacts them personally. So trying to get that link between, your life will be better through this change and you can be part of helping make that change is quite a powerful argument. And I think that there are lots of things out there. It just takes a little bit of activity for people to get out there and do something.
Yeah, and I guess along the themes as well of giving young people a voice, Paul, one of the things that, I know I face this as a young worker, it can feel very kind of disempowering and overwhelming being the sort of youngest, lowest ranking person in a big organisation. And I was wondering, what advice would you give to young people about, whether they're working in a sort of green job or not, how they can be empowered to create change within their own work environment?
Well, the first thing would be to join a union, and you'd expect someone from the TUC to say that, but I think it is really important. Now, that's, the reality is that young people who go to work as teachers or in automotive plants or indeed in supermarkets like Tesco's, the likelihood is they will join a union because the people they're working alongside will also be union members and people will encourage them to join. The big problem we've got, Var, is that far too many young people work in environments where there are no unions present at all. Now, that's a challenge to unions, but it's also, I think, one of the issues we've got in the UK economy more broadly. We need collective bargaining and we need unions. They're good for workers, but I'd argue they're good for the organisations that employ them and good for the economy as well more broadly. But I think for young people going into work, joining a union and getting active in a union does help give you that sense of agency. And just when we were having the discussion before, people can get engaged and make a difference locally, not just through local politics, but at a workplace level as well. One of the things that we've seen in a number of workplaces is union environmental reps, effectively green reps in the workplace, working with members, working with employers to develop plans to, make workplaces more energy efficient, to think about things like travel to work patterns. How do you reduce the carbon footprint of the organisation? This is like a sort of win-win agenda for employers and employees alike. And I think that there's certainly more that we should be doing. And I think if we had a Labour government, certainly under the previous Labour government, we're talking to them actively about, statutory rights for union environmental reps. I think that would be a good step forward. There are other things that we could do. To give an example, from London 2012 in the Olympic Games, we had a very clear overarching agreement with the games organisers, right from the construction of the stadiums to the delivery of the games themselves, about how the games would be used to have a positive impact, a positive social impact, a positive employment impact in terms of direct employment, support for apprenticeships, again thinking about the environmental footprint of the games. If we are serious about large-scale infrastructure investments, I think there should be an obligation on employers right across the piece to have to sign up to those sort of framework agreements that set out how you're going to deliver a project in a way that supports good quality in employment and also supports our aspirations to decarbonise our economy. You shouldn't get government support to build social housing without thinking through very clearly how is this going to contribute to our low-carbon future and how is this going to support the skills of young people going forward.
And I guess a slight follow-on, Paul, I don't know if you're allowed to answer this, but I've got a question in the chat box, which is the greenest union?
They're all green. You know what? The reality is, what's really interesting is, I think the debate in the trade union movement has moved on incredibly over the last 3 or 4 years. We've obviously got members working in energy-intensive industries and working in, for example, the oil and gas industry. And one of the things that's happened over the last 3 or 4 years is those members and those unions, I think, have been actively engaged in the discussion around what does a just transition actually mean? How do we bring members and involve members in that discussion? We know we need to decarbonise our economy, but we know we need to do that in a way that also supports people's livelihoods. that doesn't see the sort of industrial transition that we saw in the late 80s, where we had mass unemployment in communities that didn't recover for decades. So you'd be hard pressed, honestly, Vari, to find a TUC union where this issue isn't high up the agenda, because it's high up the agenda of our members. I mean, our members at the end of the day are ordinary members of the public. They care about the stuff that the public cares about. What's interesting, and I think Liam touched on this, is you need to make this real to people, though. So when you talk about climate change, the environment in the abstract, that's one thing. When you talk to people about green manufacturing, I mean, I think Nadia made a really important point about, green jobs not just being seen as the traditional sort of, metal bashing jobs in manufacturing. Yeah, we do need to think about how do we decarbonise our retail industry, how do we decarbonise social care in the NHS, and link that to issues around good quality employment. But the answer is they're all equally good, just join one of them.
Good answer, good diplomatic answer, I'd say. So I guess on a slightly different note, Melanie, you touched in your opening remarks about how to deliver jobs for young people in, not kind of the big urban centres, so Manchester or London or wherever. Do you think it's a reality that we will see increasing numbers of young people taking up and wanting green jobs in towns, but also in, remote and rural locations?
Absolutely. I mean, even recently we had one company that had about 12 open positions for apprenticeships, and they had 1,200 applicants. It is something that people want to get into. It is, it is seen by the public at large, and for young people in particular through education, as being a sector of the future. It is, it's youthful, it is exciting, it is innovative. It is broad in its application. I mean, looking at offshore wind, and I've got turbines behind me, that tends to be what people think about when it comes to this sector. But the reality is that the jobs that are associated with the industry are incredibly vast. It's not just about offshore wind technicians. It's about everything that goes behind it. Everything from, cells that monitor how quickly and regularly the turbines turn and how effective and efficient they are. Looking at robotic technology to assist in surveys under the water, so it's not requiring individuals to kind of put themselves at risk. So, I mean, it's so exciting, and even looking at environment-based jobs. So looking at how you do assessments of seabedscape to make sure that they are suitable, that they are safe, and how companies can anchor their turbines there. It is huge. We're only going to see growth. The latest auction round has opened up to onshore and to solar. So in the next 18 months, we will see onshore and solar companies being able to bid into that auction round. We're looking at a jobs growth of around 27,000 by the time 2030 rolls around. So there is a lot of opportunity, and I think that I saw one of the questions about councils, and somebody up in Sunderland asking about actions councils can take, and I think that there is an awful lot that's happening. There are catapults there which are dedicated to improving innovation and bringing that innovation to young people, and that is done with the support of local authorities.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to have to end there because we're going to get kicked off promptly at 10:02. But I just want to say a huge thank you to all our panellists. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Thank you to the Offshore Wind Industry Council for sponsoring this event. And yeah, I'm definitely excited by what we've been talking to. As we've mentioned, there's huge challenges that we'll be facing as a generation, but hopefully with the right pressure, with the right policies and the right people, we'll be able to deliver good jobs for young people in the green industry. So thank you very much.
Thanks.